at ethos.com/term. That's ethos.com/term.
Time spent on application may vary. Online health questions
My
required.
favorite part of the Voice of Freedom's tremendous radio broadcast has got to be Tuesdays at 7 a.m. Elci. He's the voice of freedom, by the way. He's got a guy named Tony D'Angelo. Tony D, as I like to call him, Tony D. This guy, Tony, is old school. No baloney. Just simply kicks ass and taking names.
He's up late to give you the news you can't get anywhere else early. He fights for truth and justice and the American way. Please welcome our pal from the Paragon Trust Company, the real Tony D. Tony D'Angelo.
All right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Every Tuesday at the same time, we bring on one of our favorites. And not only our favorites, but I know he's your favorite as well. You can find him on X, Tony D'Angelo 7. You can find him on his own YouTube page with his own show he unleashes on the public every Thursday. He's our good pal, Tony D. Tony, good morning. How are you, man?
Good morning, Elci. Good morning, everyone. I'm proud to be among you.
All right. I see here where you want to start with someone we're going to have on tomorrow, Betsy McCoy and her tax plan. What's going on there?
We can start there, and I know we'll hit a lot of things. I was reading with interest January 23rd, Betsy McCoy, now an announced candidate for governor, had a press conference in Hartford to launch her campaign, and her pledge was to fully eliminate the income tax, which does generate a lot of revenue. Where does the revenue come from? We can go on for days with that. The argument presented was one which I do agree with, that the more money you put in people's hands, the more will be spent and things will be hoist on their own petard rather than that of the government. Now, several things here in her proposal is given from what I am reading are significant, and I want to call attention to them. Her pledge was to gradually eliminate the income tax and leave the other taxes alone. That's point one. And number two, she committed to having a panel like, I guess the question was, well, how are you going to do this, considering this is something that was proposed in, Roland 1 and Stefanowski 2. And she said, well, I'm going to get a panel of national advisors, and we're going to come up with a plan, but this is what I want to do. Now, here's where I sit on this. When I heard this, I said, finally, somebody's been listening to what I've been saying on this show for 6 years, that we need a simple, flat, fair tax. Now, I'm not a fan really of people go to Florida. It's like, well, I have no income taxes here. Well, you have a whole bunch of other taxes, or New Hampshire's the same way. I'm not a fan of no tax states generally. The states that do the best are low tax states. It's like Idaho, they're booming. It's just simple beans. It's you can look at it, you can see it, what's going to happen. But relative to Betsy's plan, I really, really, really don't want this to be a case of being in the right church but sitting in the wrong pew. And there's just a couple of things I'm going to raise. Now, me, myself, and I, all taxes should be flat on a static base. It's a whole lot less to administrate. You don't get into minutiae. You don't get into audits. You don't get into appeals. You don't get into court. And I've been saying that for 6 years. Now, again, the second thing is leave all the other taxes the same. It is not a good idea not to cut corporate taxes. Now, I've run these numbers, and if you make the individual rate 4.5 as a starter and knock the corporate rate to 4.5%, you come to almost, with a little bit of dynamic influence there, you come to about the same revenues you've got now. Now, again, you've got to reinforce bad spending. You've got to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, because it doesn't help if you're cutting it in the top. We're going to talk about duplications in a little bit. And look at it this way. If we're at 4.5% as opposed to what we are now, which is I think 8+ in some cases on the corporate side, you had corporations in Minnesota. We could talk about what happened on Saturday. I've got my impressions on that, but what you had the corporations coming out, and I'm sure they were screaming at Walls. I'm sure they were screaming at Trump. Target, Best Buy, General Mills, Cargill, United Health Group, 3M. And they're saying, hey, guys, stop the bull. You know what? We just want to work and live and make money. It's like if you look at the crime scene in, if you want to call it a crime scene in Minnesota, all those people, nobody considers all those people in the storefronts when all this stuff is happening and all the wonderful things that are on the windows and the broken windows and things. They're still paying rent on those storefronts, So basically, these corporations are saying, hey, stop it. Now, if Connecticut had a really competitive low tax rate and could get its damned administrative state fixed, it's like, hey guys, over here, we've got good things happening, but unfortunately, states like that ain't going to come. Corporations like that are not going to come to Connecticut because our corporate rate is not competitive. Our government administration stinks, frankly, and that's basically, So it's like you got to get that corporate rate down because you've got to start attracting private capital. Government's not going to generate its own capital; it's just not going to happen. The second thing, the idea of the blue ribbon panel, bad idea. You're going to end up with a bunch of bean brains, and you're going to end up with a bunch of theorists. Look at Stefanowski in 2017 or 2018, brought Art Laffer in. Now, I love Art Laffer. I love the Laffer curve. But when it got so super scientific to the point where nobody could even begin to, conceptualize, what about this? What about that? Do your numbers, make it simple, get the revenue to round out. Moreover, look where you're going to cut, frankly, because there's a lot you can cut here. There's a lot you can consolidate. You've got this thing to where, so can this plan work? Yes, it can work. It is a good plan. It is a great idea, but let's not get off on the failure train that we had on the first two strikes. This is really our last chance. Thank God Betsy did this because, frankly, I'm beginning to see a little light. Let's not screw it up.
So what's different then with Betsy's plan as opposed to Bob's in at least the presentation? Because I remember having Bob in here talking to him with Laffer, the Laffer curve, talking about that many different times and all of that. And then all of a sudden one day he had to say, well, nobody seems to want this and nobody seems to want to pursue it. So I'm kind of pulling it off the table. I mean, how does she present this so that it sticks?
He has to present a total and complete view of it. I think what Bob did was great. Unfortunately, very few people could grasp it. And if you approach it with, you will pay less income taxes and the government will run better and your property taxes will go down. And we're going to eliminate the waste, the fraud, the abuse, the administrative duplication. That's what she has to do. Again, she had from what I understand, she did not have a great plan that was to be developed, or shall I say a detailed plan. But that's how you make it work. Where the other plans have failed is they've just been, people haven't been able to grasp. And of course, the other thing is, how many people do you have in the state that basically, low income taxes, what's that? I don't pay it. I get my money from the state. That's the fundamental problem. That's the thing. You can't fix one without the other. It ain't going to work. It ain't going to happen.
Right. And to your knowledge, do the other two serious candidates, Aaron Stewart, Ryan Fazio, by the way, Fazio will be on with us this Thursday. Do they have plans similar to Betsy's, or have they not produced anything to your knowledge?
To the extent of my reading, I understand Fazio has something where he says he will give everybody $1,500 back. I don't know the details of that. I haven't really. I've seen that more as a statement than shall I say, a working diagram. Reading in the Hartford Courant on Sunday, I believe Aaron Stewart just would not answer this question.
Okay,
that's what I was reading.
All right, Tony D'Angelo is with us. Tony D'Angelo 7 on the X. Of course, he's got his own YouTube page. Must watch videos every single week. All right, is there anything else on this one you wanted to continue with, Tony?
We'll actually, I just want to say this. If my function here is, I believe that I'm blessed by God and blessed by you to do is I've got to call the balls and strikes, and basically because I see people going to one side or the other. I'm going to tell you if I believe something's going to work or not. And I mean, I go back with this stuff. I go back to Reagan, 1981, the Economic Recovery Tax Act. I can tell you where it went off the rails. I'm not saying I am, the expert, but I can certainly tell you where things have failed. I've watched them over the years. So when I'm saying this, I'm not being the least bit critical. I'm enthusiastic about our plan, but these are the things that you're really going to have to do to make this thing work. And otherwise, it's not going to work, and it's just going to go to the dustbin of history. And I really don't want to see that, frankly, because we need this too badly.
All right, Tony D again with us as always. If you have a question or a comment to Tony and you can't reach him through Twitter, feel free to email me here at leelcradio@gmail.com, and I'll pass it along to Tony. You've been talking about the nonprofit scandals for a while. You want to pivot to that?
Visions on a snowy Sunday afternoon. I was during the blizzard. What do you do for fun, Tony? Well, I was reading the forensic audit of the Blue Hill Civic Association as commissioned by the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development, 67-page examination. And basically it was commissioned by the DECD and its commissioner, Daniel O'Keefe, to, where are the falls? What happened? How did this work? And one thing I want to make really clear, whenever I see an audit like this, now the audit is an interesting piece of work. It is a very good piece of work. We're going to talk about that in a second. But whenever I see somebody say, we're going to audit this to find out what happened, it's immediately some sort of public relations thing. It's immediate. It's never, at least hardly ever, done with a heartfelt intention. Gee, we really messed up. We got to find out what happened. But it's done with an idea to, I like to call these things blame throwing audits. And the auditors, who's Clifton Larson Allen's a well-known accounting firm, were really, through reading this, we're representing their client. I mean, after all, that's how the bread gets buttered, the Department of Economic and Community Development. And they did an extensive study as to what the Blue Hill Civic Association and Sheba and what the sub-recipients were or were not doing of this incredible largesse. You want to talk about largesse, you want to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. Chicken scratch math. $327 million went to nonprofits in Connecticut last year. We got no FOI on them. We don't know what the hell they're doing. I mean, this audit that you're looking at, or this forensic audit, is living proof that this is what you can't get at because they don't want you to see it, basically. And then when it comes down to, well, what the hell happened, to exonerate me, I'm going to show you what they did. I mean, this is, how do you start to cut expenses, with Connecticut? Well, let me count the waste. And the thing is, and when I started to read this from the perspective of the auditors, Clifton Larson, none of this could have happened without the input or non-input of the, as I say, the should be abolished or greatly reworked Department of Economic and Community Development. And, this is a long history. My mother was a dancing teacher. She had a famous saying she'd always say to me, it takes two to tango. Things do not happen on their own. You need two participants. And if you going back to the work of the auditors of public accounts, whom we pay in this state to do audits, and more often than not, they turn in a fine piece of work, sometimes not perfect, but the history is pervasive. I'm going back to that first audit. I'm going back to, this is the history of the Department of Economic and Community Development, the one that was done in 2024. And these are just, I've got a whole list. It's insane. We would be here till 10 o'clock if I had to read them. 19 projects totaling $31 million. They missed statements. The 2022 understated delinquencies, they omitted $10 to $26 million in uncollectibles. Now, we're handing out millions of dollars in the state of Connecticut for business that's uncollectible. It's like, what the hell are we doing, frankly? And this is even now the same audit, right? This is even before the whole thing that's happening now. There's no on-site reviews for 7 small business partners, 8.8 million, and the Small Business Express partners, 32 million. What is this money? Where did it go? Who did it go to? We don't know. We don't know. We're just going to keep handing it out. And, the legislature, yes, the entire legislature, including the Republican Party, says, oh, we're not going to stop, funding the nonprofits. Well, I mean, listen, if you got a, good heart, your heart's kind of in the wrong place. Now, when you get down to this whole thing of what has happened recently, Douglas McCrory, March 7, 2023, is pressuring the Department of Economic and Community Development to approve a grant for $1 million for 10 jobs. And basically, the commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development, the DECD, is saying, am I reading this right? I mean, like what's going on here? But yet the money goes down anyway. And then there's the $350,000 Sheba contract. It was ineligible, but let's talk about it, says Ms. Hummel at the DECD. Now, the thing is, at the DECD, now in late 2024, they start to develop, they start to develop a perspective of the missing money. And the internal controls of DECD didn't detect the $300,000 and $500,000 wire fraud. And then the same thing, they approved $15 million to Blue Hill Civic Association, but didn't monitor the $1.2 million to Sheba. Now, the whole thing is, when this started, Blue Hills went to McCrory and said, let's sit on this for a while. I mean, this is insane. Now, one thing I want to make very clear in the last 3 minutes or so that we have, in the Clifton Orson Allen report, and I have to read this on the screen, it gets to a point when you start to do these audits where it's like, hey, I'm trying to make this thing, make it look like you're not responsible for anything that happened here. It was somebody else, but their words, not mine. DECD must establish clear expectations for monitoring by requiring the primary recipient to maintain accurate records and oversee its sub-recipients. Now, the DECD is their client. DECD is obligated to exercise this authority when risks or irregularities are identified. I'm just scattershooting. It's a long paragraph. Further, DECD is responsible for enforcing compliance when deficiencies occur. I can go on and on and on and on. So basically, buried in, I guess that is like maybe the 54th page of the examination, it's like, hey guys, I can't really do this in good faith without saying that you had a substantial part in causing this to happen by not exercising management, oversight, governance, fiscal controls, and just you keep throwing money, the legislature into a leaky bucket, and this is what you get. So going back to Betsy, how do you make a lower income tax work? Well, you got to plug the leak in the bucket. It ain't hard, but the concept isn't hard. But you're not going to be able to do that if you're spending at the same rate, and you're cutting taxes on one end. If you're so fortunate, that's not going to work. It's got to be a total approach.
Tony D'Angelo is his name. If you missed any of that, of course, you can watch it a little bit later on. Tony always unleashes the video up on his X page. What's coming up on Thursday, Tony?
Well, we're going to play this ball off the wall. I think there's a lot more we can do here. I think a lot of the visuals that I tried to touch on here, I can put up on the screen and we can go down them. We started to touch on it in the last week. 30 for Tony, but there's so much here. As I said to everybody, we're going to be taking this little by little by little, and little things mean a lot when you're looking at something like this.
All right, TD, how'd you fare with the snow? Were you all right?
For the most part, yeah, for the most part, okay. Had to lock up the chickens, freezing cold. It's absolutely insane. But hey, as Ernie Banks would say, let's play three.
All right, buddy. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thanks, pal. Appreciate it.
The great Tony D. All right, we'll come right back. Bruce Flax will join us after the bottom of the hour news right here on 94.9 News Now and Stimulating Talk.